Hello and welcome to A Deeper Dive with Dara Kam. That's me, Dara Kam, senior writer for the News Service of Florida here in Tallahassee. And we are joined today by another special guest, pistol packin' great-grandma Marion Hammer. Ms. Hammer is probably one of, if not the most controversial figures to walk the halls of the Florida Capitol over the past 3 decades. She is a former president, the first female president of the National Rifle Association. Join us as we take a deep dive with Ms. Hammer into some of the many pieces of gun legislation she shepherded through the Florida legislature, including the Stand Your Ground law and a requirement that the state allow individuals who meet certain qualifications to carry concealed weapons. Stick with us for a rockin' and rollin' time with Marion Hammer.
If we had not had guns as colonists, we would not be a free nation today because we would not have had any means to fight the British and develop this fine nation. Freedom came out of the barrel of a gun.
You're listening to A Deeper Dive with Dara, a podcast by City and State, Florida.
We are very, very excited to have a special guest this morning, Marion Hammer, the former president of the National Rifle Association, who really needs no introduction, but that's an introduction. Good morning, Ms. Hammer. Thank you so much for joining us.
Good morning, Dara. It's my pleasure to be with you.
So we were chatting a little bit while we were getting all the equipment set up here this morning, and you've been lobbying for the NRA as long as I can remember, and I've been doing this for more than 25 years, and you are have been a fixture in the Florida Capitol throughout my tenure as a reporter. Can you talk a little bit about how long you've been working for the NRA? Well, let me start and say you retired from the NRA in June, and you'll explain that in more depth as you tell us a little bit about your history with the NRA and how you got started.
Well, I got started as a volunteer in September of 1974, and I worked as a volunteer until September of 1978, when I began to formally represent the NRA and gun owners here in Florida and all over America, actually. So effectively, I have been lobbying in Florida for 48 years, but formally for 44 years.
I think that might make you the dean of the lobbying corps. Might have made you. I forget who holds that glamorous title, but you started volunteering for the NRA back in the 70s. How did you first start getting involved with guns?
Well, I started getting involved with guns when I was 5 years old, growing up on a farm, and my grandfather would go hunting, subsistence hunting, and I wanted to go with him. But he wouldn't let me go because I didn't know how to shoot or how to handle a gun. So instead of begging him to let me go, I begged him to teach me how to shoot because I knew if I knew how to shoot, he'd let me go. So he taught me how to shoot before I was 6 years old. And once I knew how to shoot, then I went hunting with him, and then one day he told me, go hunting, get us a couple rabbits for dinner. So it started very early in a little area called Dentsville, South Carolina, outside of Columbia, on a small family farm.
So you started off hunting rabbits?
Rabbits and squirrels.
And squirrels. Did you eat the squirrels? I've heard people...
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Squirrels are kind of tough, and you have to soak them, and you have to tenderize them. Or they're pretty tough, but they're pretty tasty.
And if there's a dearth of meat around, I guess that's what you eat.
In those days, growing up on a farm, everything was subsistence. Mm-hmm. My grandfather had a day job, but he didn't make a lot of money, so we depended on hunting for meat. Meat was expensive out of our measly budget. And once he taught me how to shoot, I would get a nickel allowance a week, a whole nickel. And we'd go to town every Saturday, and at the hardware store, I could buy 2 .22 cartridges for a penny. So I'd buy 6 cartridges, 3 cents worth of 22 cartridges, and 2 cents worth of 2 or 3 for a penny candy, and that'd last me all week.
Candy and ammo.
Candy and ammo.
So you were a hard ass back when you were 6 years old.
I was.
Well, some things never change. So what is your current role at the NRA? You retired in June.
In June, I retired as NRA ILA's active lobbyist. I don't go to the Capitol, walk the halls, testify in committees, and I don't work elections. I don't do active lobbying. I am still under contract with NRA for consulting and anything NRA needs. A lot of people don't realize that NRA is separate from ILA. ILA is the lobbying arm, Institute for Legislative Action.
Okay.
And because of federal laws, there has to be a separation. And so ILA does the lobbying, does all of the election work, all of the active stuff that people normally see. Under NRA, we do training. We're general operations, training, our law enforcement work.
Is that going to be boring for you?
I am never bored. I find something to do. And under my contract, if a legislator needs or wants something and calls me and asks me for help, I'm allowed to provide help.
You're just not going to be the face that people see testifying at the podium in the Capitol anymore.
That's correct.
Okay. You have been doing this, as you say, for over 40 years. What's the biggest change that you've seen in your career in terms of, the lobbying, the process, I guess?
Well, that's kind of hard to say because it's not pretty. People have changed. Lobbyists have changed. Legislators have changed. In the old days, we really, really cared about issues, and very few people care anymore about anything but themselves and what they're doing. And it's kind of hard to go to the Capitol and lobbying in front of a bunch of people who read a script and have no idea what they're saying, and it doesn't really mean anything to them. This means something to me. It always has.
One of the things that has always, you have been castigated, demonized by people who want stronger gun control. And I'll let you talk a little bit about what you've been on the receiving end of. But, one thing that it always has seemed to me that you're not just a hired gun, pardon the pun, but, many lobbyists will just get up there, they get hired to push an issue. I mean, I have always felt from you that you really believe in the issues that you're pushing, as controversial as they are, and as sometimes, the outcomes maybe not be what you want or what is the intent of the legislation that you're behind, but you have always felt sincere to me.
Well, I care about the issues. Like I said, I grew up with guns. The Constitution, the Bill of Rights, our founding fathers, our history, that means something to me. History doesn't mean much to people today, and I find that very distressing. But I believe in what I do. I believe in my work. I believe that the Bill of Rights is about individuals. I believe that the Second Amendment is about the individual right to keep and bear arms for lawful purposes, and I really don't care what somebody who doesn't like guns thinks. Facts are facts. All you have to do is read it. And through the years, I have seen myself somewhat as more of an educator than a persuader. Lobbyists persuade. Educators teach. If I teach you about my issue and the truth and the facts, then I don't have to persuade you, because your intelligence will bring you to where you need to be on my issue.
Has that? Well, I mean, that's a very sort of a golden, a high ideal. In truth, the many legislators on the Republican side, at least, are intimidated by the NRA because of a negative endorsement or an opposition from the NRA could harm them politically and electorally. I mean, isn't their own self-serving desire play a part of their willingness to be educated by you?
Well, if it does, I'm lucky to be able to educate them, because it's not about them. It's not about politics. It's not about whether or not they can be elected. It's about freedom. It's about the Constitution. It's about the Bill of Rights. It's about this nation, who we are, where we came from, and where we're going.
Well, let's talk a little bit about some of your accomplishments in the legislature. What do you view, what measures are you the most proud of?
I am most proud of shall issue right to carry that we passed in 1987, because under the Constitution, you have a right to keep and bear arms. But politicians had started whittling away at that right. And one of the issues that came before us was that certain jurisdictions would not allow people to carry guns under the Constitution for their own safety and the safety of their families. And as far back as 1892, Florida started requiring a license to carry a concealed weapon or firearm on your person. Now, I'm starting in 1974, and I'm looking at a law that was passed in the state of Florida in 1892. And so how do you fix that? How do you restore rights that were taken away that long ago? And there's an educational process that you go through, and it took 7 years to get that piece of legislation passed. And the reason it's called shall issue is because if you don't have a criminal record, a record of mental illness, if you qualify under all of the standards that are laid out in the bill, they shall give you a license.
This is a concealed carry permit is what you're talking
Well,
about.
it's not a permit, it's a license. People call it a permit.
Okay.
And statutorily, it's a license.
Okay.
And I never liked the word permit because it suggests that you need somebody's permission.
Right.
Well, we have permission in the Constitution.
And so since that law was passed, we have how many now? We have over...
I think 48 states now have shall issue.
Right. Was Florida the first?
Yes.
Okay, so that was another first. We can go through your list of firsts. But you also, we have how many licenses now? It's over...
It's well over 2 million.
2 million. I remember when we hit the 1 million mark several years ago. That was a big
deal.
Yeah.
And we have more licenses issued than any other state in the union.
We're the third largest state in the country, and I know that California has much more stringent gun laws, and New York does, and I guess Texas would be the one that would be closest to us. Florida also was a first in Stand Your Ground, which I know you don't call it Stand Your Ground, but can you talk a little bit about that bill, that law, and what it was like to get that passed?
Well, the law came about because you need to be able to protect yourself in your home, and it was called the Castle Doctrine Law. And the anti-gunners started calling it Stand Your Ground, as if there's something wrong with standing your ground. People needed to know statutorily that when you're in your home and somebody breaks in, your home is your castle. You can protect your home, your family members, against any intruder. When someone breaks into your home, you can't deal with using force with force because you don't know whether or not they're armed. You don't know whether or not they're there to steal your TV set or to rape the children. You have no idea, so you need to be free to take what action you feel is necessary to protect your home and its inhabitants from any intruder. As a part of that law, we put in language that says when you are any place where you have a right to be, you can stand your ground and take whatever action you feel is necessary to protect yourself.
That's the controversial part of the law.
It's only controversial because judges and the courts, on their own, it was not a part of statutory law, had decided that if someone attacked you, you needed to turn around and run before fighting back. The very idea that law-abiding people in any place that they have a legal right to be should have to run, turn their back on a criminal element and run in the face of attack rather than standing their ground and fighting back is absurd.
This law came under very harsh criticism after George Zimmerman used it in his defense after shooting and killing Trayvon Martin several years ago. That it became a national flashpoint. Do you feel that the law has been misused by people as a defense?
Well, of course. I mean, what criminal do you know who ever said, okay, I did it? They all say, I didn't do it, I didn't do anything wrong. So there are people who use stand your ground as an excuse rather than a reason for what they did. That's why we have courts, that's why we have juries to examine the actions of people and make determinations. And in some of these cases, people have been determined to have legally stood their ground and took appropriate action, and some have not. And so if you're going to trust the jury system before this law passed, you certainly have to trust it after the law passed.
There also was a provision in there, and I'm sorry I didn't brush up on it before we started, but about the presumption being, there's something about the presumption being that the person claiming the stand your ground right was...
Well, what happened was a group of prosecutors decided that if you claimed stand your ground, they were going to presume that you were guilty and you would have to prove yourself to be innocent, which flies in the face of our basic fundamental judicial system.
Mm-hmm.
And so we took action to reverse that, so people who stand their ground have the same presumption of innocence that everybody else has on every other thing, and the prosecution has to prove that they didn't stand their ground and that they didn't do it legally.
What was it like? It was 4 years ago now, I guess. What was it like being the lone voice for the NRA, almost the lone, after the mass shooting at Marjorie Stoneman Douglas High School, when the Capitol was filled with the students, their parents, folks who were in support of stricter gun laws? It was quite an emotional scene there in the building.
It was a created scene. Yes, there are emotions, but there was a lot of money behind this effort. There was a lot of money put immediately into funding travel for people who would riot and come to the Capitol, lobby, scream and yell, do sit-ins, all of that stuff, because we all mourn the tragedy and the lives that were lost. But the fact remains, it was one individual who committed that crime, and that individual had been identified over and over again to authorities as a problem, and they ignored it. And so, like a pot on the stove, it finally boiled over. That wasn't NRA's fault. That wasn't anybody's fault but the shooter and authorities who had turned a blind eye to the misdeeds of that shooter.
That law in the legislature, in that shooting happened during the legislative session, and in one of the very few laws certainly since you've been lobbying, the Republican-led legislature passed a law that enacted some gun restrictions. They did away with bump stocks, and they raised the age to purchase long guns from 18 to 21. Already under federal law, handguns, people under 21 can't purchase handguns. The NRA filed suit over this. That litigation is ongoing. You became embroiled in that litigation, and I believe were the subject of some hate mail. Can you talk a little bit about what happened after that?
Well, I became a target of the other side. I never shot anybody. I never did anything wrong. I stood up for what I believed. But instead of the shooter, I became a target of the other side. Death threats like you wouldn't believe. They even threatened my family members, my grandchildren. It was the ugliest thing, so I decided to fight back, and we filed suit against 4 of the individuals who had been quite ugly with their threats and their comments, their letters, their email, their phone calls. There were hundreds of them. It was one of the ugliest things you've ever seen.
I've read some of them. They were quite graphic and pretty revolting. You know, a lot of people just verbally going around accusing you of having blood on your hands.
Sure, and that doesn't bother me, because you have to expect that people are not going to like you because of what you believe in today's climate. And so when somebody would call and say, I'm going to shoot you, I would say, okay, you better get me with your first shot, because you damn well won't get a second one. And then I'd hang up.
We'll be right back with the NRA's Marion Hammer.
Here at Deeper Dive, we want to hear from you, the listeners. We invite you to send your questions, comments, and feedback to our mailbag. You can reach us at deeperdive@cityandstatefl.com. That's deeperdive@cityandstatefl.com. Get your 2 cents in by sending us an email.
Welcome back to A Deeper Dive with Dara.
It was a case of trying to intimidate me, make me quit my job. I was a threat because they couldn't get the gun control passed that they wanted. And as we all know, it's a matter of record. There was a lot of Bloomberg money pumped into the Florida legislature. The Senate President, Bill Galvano, took $500,000, $500,000 from Bloomberg.
That's former New York City Mayor Mike Bloomberg, who has funded, I can't remember the name of his organization, Everytown USA.
And Moms Demand Action.
Right. Yeah, so he was, I think, also helped jumpstart, I'm not 100% positive about this, but March for Our Lives, that was the movement that grew out of the Marjorie Stoneman Douglas shooting.
It's pretty well known that Bloomberg had funded just about every anti-gun organization created during that time and pumped a lot of money into trying to usurp the United States Constitution and the Bill of Rights.
One of the other things in that 2018 law was they call it the red flag law. It gives law enforcement the authority to ask a judge to remove firearms from individuals who temporarily who pose a threat, and I think that it lasts for up to a year. It can last for up to a year.
It's a very bad law because it doesn't do what people think it does. And we have had law enforcement agencies around the state misuse the law, do what they want to do, and blame the law. They take people's guns without asking a judge. They ask a judge after the fact, and they have no probable cause to seize firearms. There's very bad language other than the direct gun control stuff in the red flag law.
Now, I've spoken to some of your nemesis, Sheriff Bob Galtieri, Pinellas County Sheriff Bob Galtieri. And he has assured me that the use of that has saved lives. You don't
That's
believe-
his opinion. That is not empirical knowledge.
You know, I just want to tell our listeners that we have the privilege of sitting in Ms. Hammer's office as we're recording this, and I'm looking around, and there is quite the collection of American Eagles, and there is a glass long gun with tequila in it. I'd love to hear the story behind that in a moment. And there are also many different political cartoons and magazine covers of you holding a gun over the years.
And some of them not very flattering.
Most of them flattering. But what was it like? You were the first female president of the NRA. What year were you the president?
I became president in late 1995.
Okay.
I was president in 96, 97. I left office in June of 98.
What was it like to be a woman in leadership in what seems to me a very male-centric world? With
all due respect, that is a typical media reaction. Women own guns. Women are protected under the Constitution. It's my right as much as it is a man's right. And the fact that I fight should not amaze anyone. Women should fight for what they believe in. And when I became president, the mainstream media went nuts. They had something new to talk about. I had more interviews than you can ever imagine. And the thing that amazed me most was that they were amazed that I knew guns, that I owned a gun, that I was actually a shooter, that it actually meant something to me. I was not a figurehead. I was there because I needed to be there at that point in history.
Right, and I'm not diminishing the fact that you are, the gravitas that you have as an individual, as a
But when you first met me, you didn't know that.
No, I didn't. I mean, but I know you now after many, many years. We've known each other for many years. And despite what you say of women owning guns, and I know there are many women who own guns and there are many women who have licenses, but it still is in the leadership in almost every arena, men are dominant, so I was just asking, what was it like to be a female leader in an environment that is dominated by men?
It really wasn't any different for me.
A thing.
I used a different restroom, but other than that, we worked together, we cared together, we protected together. And quite frankly, I think my male counterparts were glad to have some relief.
Has there been another female president?
There have been two.
Okay. All right. But you were the trailblazer there. So let's talk about what I know listeners want to know. How many guns do you have and what kind are they?
Well, how many I have is nobody's business, and what kind they are is also nobody's business. And if you want to know how many I have, not enough.
I know that this is something that you have acknowledged on the record. You do have the number one. You have the first
concealed weapons license.
Right. So
yes.
You are still number one in that arena. I want to talk a little bit about and I know you're going to chew me out for calling them assault weapons, because you always do. Ban on assault weapons. There was a constitutional a ballot initiative that failed to get on the ballot. That's been a topic of discussion every time there's a mass shooting. Mostly every time there's a mass shooting, it seems to be many times a young man with an AR-15 style, assault style weapons. What is the great agita with NRA members, with gun rights advocates, with saying, these guns are too dangerous, people shouldn't have access to them?
That's total nonsense, because a firearm is a firearm. All semi-automatic firearms are functionally identical in the way they work. The only thing that's different is the way they look. For example, you and I are dressed differently. You might be dressed, and somebody might call you a shotgun. The way I'm dressed, they might call me an assault weapon. But you can strip away all of the black plastic parts off of a so-called assault weapon and put the barrel and working mechanism in a wooden stock. It looks entirely different. It goes by a different name, but it's the same thing. People misunderstand. There's been a campaign to vilify the way a particular gun looks. That makes as much sense as vilifying you or me for the way we look. And in terms of assault weapon, that's a term that is deliberately deceptive. It was created to be deceptive. If you've ever read police reports, in any case where there's been violence, when you read the police report, it will say something like, the assault weapon was a baseball bat. The assault weapon was a Bowie knife. The assault weapon was a table lamp. Anything you can use to assault another person or something is an assault weapon. If it's a weapon and you can assault somebody with it, it's an assault weapon. It's not a particular kind of gun.
Some of these guns, though, are not used for hunting. They're designed to be used in warfare and kill folks.
Is that your opinion or what you've been told?
I'm articulating the argument in favor of restricting the access to these weapons.
Well, that's total nonsense, because most people...
More nonsense.
Pure nonsense. Most people don't know the history of the firearm they're calling assault weapon. They're calling it a military style. They were created for civilians first, and the military liked the design and adopted the design. Suddenly they became military-style assault weapons. They are not designed to kill people. They are designed for hunting, for target shooting, and the military picked them up and uses them for military purposes. I use my car to go back and forth to the grocery store. What if I used my car to go somewhere else? Does it earn a different name because I drive it back and forth to the office? Is it any different when I drive it to the office or when I drive it to the grocery store? How you use it is not what it is. It is what it is. It's a basic firearm. It can be used for hunting, and a lot of people use them for hunting. I particularly used to enjoy hunting in my days when I would go hunting, having one, because if you take a firearm with a nice wooden stock, an expensive 30-06 or 30-30 to the woods, and it's raining, you can damage a good wooden stock from the weather or the brush or anything around you. But if you take a gun in a plastic stock, you don't have to worry about the rain or the weather or bushes scratching it. So why wouldn't you take it hunting? No answer?
I'm thinking about, you know,
You're thinking about a side that you've never heard before.
I've never heard the thing about the rain, I'll be honest with you. I never heard the argument about the rain.
Look at it like this. Would you go out in a rainstorm in expensive $700 high-heeled shoes?
Well, I would never have $700 high-heeled shoes.
But people do.
I know they do.
But,
no, I don't
but
even wear
if
my
you had
suede
them,
sneakers out in the rain.
right. And so it's the same thing.
Okay.
You protect what you have, and the fact that some firearms have black plastic stocks rather than highly polished wooden stocks is no different than you wearing expensive high-heeled shoes one day and sneakers the next.
Well, speaking of expensive high-heeled shoes, there's many brands of expensive high-heeled shoes. The NRA has a formidable brand in Florida. How did that happen? Was the NRA always a thing in the Sunshine State?
NRA decided to have a presence in Florida in the mid-70s because of California. And California, unfortunately, was influencing a lot of states. And NRA did not want Florida to become like California.
Sort of, I don't want to interrupt you. I want to hear the rest of the story, but that is still a trope in Florida, isn't it? That we don't want to be California still.
Of course. And when it comes to guns, we are nothing at all like California, and that's because of NRA. Because when NRA established a presence here, we were seeing an onslaught of gun control bills. Gun bans, waiting periods, cop killer bullets, and it was all phony stuff, phony issues, Saturday night specials. What is a Saturday night special? Saturday night special is a name like assault weapon. It didn't work in the 70s and 80s. An assault weapon is not working now because if people open their eyes and ears and look at and listen to reality, they will know they're being conned.
You were talking about how the NRA built its brand, so you were trying to fend off bills that would have taken away gun rights or...
Right.
And you achieved that, but you not only fought off bills that you didn't like, you also became a state where legislation was modeled. For example, the Stand Your Ground bill. We were the first state in the nation for that, and as you said, the shall issue. So how did Florida become this model legislation? We have the moniker, the gunshine state. Was that you?
That was Wayne LaPierre deciding that NRA needed a bigger presence. He came to me and said, we need to pass some legislation in Florida to protect the right to keep and bear arms, and bear means carry. And he said, if you can do it in Florida, it'll be a model for the nation. And I said, let me go to work. So we wrote legislation. We had our lawyers look at legislation. We ran it through bill drafting. We sat down with law enforcement. We sat down with all kinds of groups. It took 7 years, but we passed it, and it became a model for the nation, and it was Wayne LaPierre's idea.
This was Stand Your Ground?
No, this was
the
Shall Issue
I'm sorry.
in 1987.
Yeah. So that started Florida as the trailblazer for...
Right.
Is there anything over your nearly 50-year career in Florida, is there anything that you regret?
Not doing more. You look back and you wish that you had done more, but at the time I don't know how I could have done more. I worked hard. We were dedicated. NRA worked with me. We did the job for the people of the state of Florida, for gun owners. Even people who used to hate guns, today not so much. People are beginning to understand that your right to protect yourself and your family is extremely important, because when you need to be able to protect your gun, you would much rather have a gun than a ballpoint pen when you need to protect the firearms you have from government. In reality, the reason the Second Amendment is in the Bill of Rights and the Constitution is because the British tried to take guns away from the American colonists as a means to keep the colonists from fighting back. The British wanted the colonists to be under their thumb to do what they wanted them to do, and they wanted to keep guns out of their hands. If we had not had guns as colonists, we would not be a free nation today, because we would not have had any means to fight the British and develop this fine nation. Freedom came out of the barrel of a gun.
Well, that's a great way to wrap up our conversation. Ms. Hammer, many, many thanks for joining us this morning, and thank you for many years of what I'd say is a friendship.
Thank you.
A Deeper Dive with Dara is a podcast by City and State Florida, hosted by Dara Kam, produced by Ryan Daly, and music for the podcast was recorded by Periodic Labs, LLC, and performed by Ryan Daly and Danny Reyes.